Welcome to FDU Rothman Family Zoom at Friday Zoom at noon. So we have a wonderful guest, a good friend, and Tony Russo has joined us. We've missed him. Tony's going to have some information, as he always does, about legislative initiatives. And so my name is Dale Caldwell. I'm a professor and executive director of the Rothman Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and we're pleased to have a friend and a very successful author, Dr. Paul Marciano, author of First Carrots and Sticks Don't Work. And now we're going to talk about, let's talk about it. Welcome, Paul. How are you?
I'm well, Dale. Wonderful to join you and your listening audience today.
Well, and again, you and I have talked for years, and you always have some amazing things to say. So I think they're in for a treat today. And I guarantee that they will learn something, that they will walk away thinking very, very differently. So who is the Rothman? I would start out with the Rothman Institute. A lot of you know us, some of you don't. And our mission is to support, promote, and research entrepreneurship with a special focus on family and veteran businesses. In addition, we're starting to do more in urban communities. We wouldn't exist without our major sponsors, the TD Bank Charitable Foundation, Provident Bank, and as I said, Tony is here, the CEO of the Commerce and Industry Association of New Jersey, better known as CIA&J. Just want to thank all of you. And we're always looking for new sponsors to support us in our program. So what do we do? What are some of our programs? Well, one is Family Business Week. We actually created this idea of Family Business Week. You can find more on our website, familybusinessweek.com. The whole idea is on the fourth week in October is to celebrate family businesses. We want people to honor and utilize and buy from family businesses throughout the year, but we want to have a special week, almost like the American Express Small Business Saturday, but to really begin to support family businesses who are the backbone of this country, but are so often overlooked. And so we need to, even now, even tonight, if you're going out to dinner, try to find a family business if you can. I also have a TV show called Family Business World and a new show called Entrepreneur State of Mind at RVN TV. And now it's on Roku TV. So you can look for that. So it's the Family Business World and Entrepreneur State of Mind. Tony Russo, who's here, is one of my guests, and we've had a number of guests over the years. And Paul, I would like you to be part of that. This is our Zoom at noon call, which is focused not only on family businesses, but entrepreneurs and others who are really trying to learn and grow. One of our premier programs is the Veterans Launching Ventures program, which is right now we're serving about 25 folks from 25 different states. It's for individuals who are military veterans or their immediate family members. The idea is that we help them over 8 weeks with months of support afterwards, develop a business plan and really grow their business. And it can be an existing business, it can be an idea. But this program, really because of Zoom, has really become international. We've had folks from Germany, and one of our programs, a gentleman who's serving in Afghanistan, called in and participating in the program, Puerto Rico and a few other places. So proud about how this is growing. And Sue Slavin and Maura Panuski have really been the heart and soul of that program going forward. In addition, this program, as well as others, are on our YouTube channel, the Rothman Institute of Entrepreneurship YouTube channel. So if you want to see some of the brilliant, or hear again some of the brilliant things that Paul is going to say, you can go on here and see it again. And we have all sorts of, literally hundreds of videos, and Maura Panuski has been our curator of this. And it's really good information because we've had so many amazing people. Well, we're starting to take applications for our New Jersey Family Business of the Year program, our premier program. And this year on October 21st, 2020, our new Family Business of the Year, Laura Mashtaler from Black Swan Espresso, just a dynamic entrepreneur in the family business. Our Family Business of the Year under $10 million in sales, Dennis McCullough from McCullough Contracting, just again, another wonderful business. And our Family Business of the Year over 10 million is Mike Seitel from Norwald Design, someone who's a member of our Family Business Forums and just a wonderful, wonderful person, him and his dad. I've created this concept called Entrepreneur Zones, which the focus is looking at Main Street and urban communities to begin to revitalize them with tax credits and other things. And I'm actually chairing a working group on Entrepreneur Zones with the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. And this is our hope, is that this will transform poverty and really begin to grow entrepreneurship in places where it's often struggled. And then we've done a number of articles and thought leadership. So with that, and that's a little bit about who we are, I want to give Dr. Paul Marciano the floor and a chance to share his screen. Paul?
Thank you. Well, my first question is, when do you sleep?
This is all Sue and Maura and the team. Well, thank you.
Well, it's remarkable your team does. I did not realize the scope, honestly, of everything. I mean, the veterans work that you do is just wonderful. I just want to make sure, can you see my screen, Dale? Are we up?
No, not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Well, let me figure out how to do that.
Yep, it'll take.
Here we go. This new technology. I see. I think I'm going to get it.
There you go. Perfect.
Here we go. We're good. So thanks for all the great work that you do. And I'm down in, as you know, the Flemington area, and we are actually an opportunity zone down here. And I'm chairman of the board of the local business improvement district. So I'm really committed to the small businesses. And of course, a lot of those are family businesses.
I didn't know that, Paul. Well, we need to talk about.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so we're trying to do some good work down here, obviously for those, as you know, that have been most impacted, a lot of these small businesses, obviously, by the pandemic. So thank you for all the work that you do, and thank you for asking me to join you. And so let's talk about it. It's the book is, as you know, about the ability to have difficult conversations, and I just wanted to share with you, and obviously the folks listening. One of the drivers of this came about from a small family business story. It's actually not a good story, but I'm going to share it anyway. So my grandfather came over from Italy and started a small coal delivery business in the 30s. And then it was a small oil furnace delivery kind of business. And my father and his older brother came to work together, of course. My father had an argument over the business with his brother, and they never spoke for 40 years. And my uncle died. I never met my only uncle, and I've never met my first cousins.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Wow.
So that's always been in the back of my mind, when it's always interesting growing up, knowing that I had cousins and uncle, but for some reason we didn't talk to them, and right, it was really weird and everything. So as I've gone out through my 30-year career and working with other family businesses and really businesses, as you know, of any size, and also experiencing life as a human being, I realized there's an awful lot of conflict and dysfunction that's caused or exacerbated by people's either unwillingness or lack of skill when it comes to having these kinds of difficult conversations. And so this book is really about trying to help people to do that. I view, I view it, as I did as a professor, Dale, like a skill deficit. So we can teach people the skills to be effective in this area.
Well, Paul, and again, this is one of the reasons we have you here, that so many family businesses are going through this, and especially with the pandemic, it's exacerbated. So this book is so timely and so needed at this time.
Yeah, well, it seems in the world in general, right? The difficult conversations are getting more difficult in some ways. And of course, look no farther than our US government for that one.
Politics, yep.
So I have this picture up here, this image, because, whatever we go over here today, whatever we talk about, I just want to encourage folks to put it on the playing field of their life. I left academia because for me, it was a little bit too theoretical in general. I just really want it to be applied. So both personally and professionally for folks. So when we think about difficult issues, how do we deal with them? Well, we kind of pretend they don't exist. We want to push them away from us physically. And oftentimes we end up biting our tongue. Now, you have no idea, Dale, how long it took me to find that picture.
I think that's a great picture. These are great.
Yeah. So, but those are the things that we do. And we tell ourselves, we let ourselves off the hook by saying things like, you know what, Dale, having the conversation, it's really not going to make a difference. Dale's not going to listen. We've had this before. He changed for a few minutes. Yeah. Then we might say to ourselves, it might make things worse. So you don't want to ruffle the feathers or wake the sleeping bear or whatever the expression. So I probably don't want to risk them being worse. We say things like, now's not a good time. I say that about all kinds of things in my life, not the least of which is, now it's just not a good time to write a book. It's just not. And we have these conversations with ourselves, and we can just about justify anything is not a good time, but particularly having these difficult conversations. One of the things we say is, well, time will make things better. Unlike
Right.
acne, it usually doesn't go away on its own. These things tend to get worse over time, and the longer they go unaddressed, the more problematic they become. Maybe the situation's my fault, right? So sometimes we look in the mirror, and by the way, sometimes it is your fault. But we don't want to use that to avoid the conflict. And by the way, if it is your fault, then maybe what needs to happen is there needs to be an apology. Maybe that's what it needs to look like.
Right.
We say to ourselves, hey, well, the situation's really not that bad, which I sort of find funny, because then it's, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to wait until it's really bad to have the conversation?
Right. Right.
The other one isn't, again, people relate to this probably highly on a personal level. You know what? I'd like to give that person feedback, about their breath, whatever it might be, but I don't want to hurt their feelings. And I tell you, one of the places, Dale, I always go is, if I was in that other person's shoes, would I want to know?
Right. Right.
Right, Dale? And the answer is almost invariably yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm waiting for the other person to apologize. That is a bad idea in most cases. You're probably going to be waiting a long time. And then the last is, I don't know how to begin the conversation. So when I started doing research for this book, I just threw out there, hey, when it comes to having these difficult conversations, like, what stops you, right? What stops you? And it was like, I don't know how to begin it.
Right.
And that's when I thought, now I want to write this book.
Yeah.
That's real motivation for me.
Yeah.
Now, I think we're going to try technology here, Dale. If you can try to throw a poll up around this, I want to see what resonates for people.
Let's do that. But this is really, really valuable for everyone. So here's your first poll.
So just ask you all to think about and put however you do these things, check marks. How does this work?
Yeah, just click it. They'll click on it. So I'll launch. You want me to launch the poll?
Please do.
Okay, we're launching it.
Oh,
now.
there we go.
There you go. Yep.
We give folks a couple minutes, a minute or so, and
yeah. So which of the statements resonate with you? Huh?
So Dale, which one resonates with you the most? Which ones?
Well, having the conversation might make things worse. I used to think, but I've realized that's not the case. And
that's like,
yeah.
I think in a lot of life, we avoid things, and one of the things that is quite frankly letting people go from our organization. There's a lot of buildup. Oh, we can't let them go. It's going to cause so much upset, and in most cases they leave, they go on, they transition, and it's the only thing you say to yourself is, why didn't I do this 6 months ago?
Well, it's funny, Paul. Yeah, I was deputy commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs, and Susan Bass-Levin, who was known to be brilliant but very tough, had me fire the people, and every single person I fired hated it when I did it, have come back afterwards and said that was the best thing, because I really didn't like my job. I didn't like what I did. And the nice thing about state, you can actually place people in other places, so they all ended up better. But I learned that lesson that you actually are doing people a favor by talking to them.
All right, let's see how they did. Let's see what we got.
In polling. All right, here we go. Share the results.
Hey, there we go. Oh, it's so interesting. I have to be honest. It's interesting because I've done this a couple of times, as and it's funny because some of these things come out differently.
Yeah.
But so having the conversation will make a difference. I don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. Wow. And you know what? I actually really understand that. I don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. If we have folks here that are in these family businesses, and that's part of a culture, and I've worked with many family businesses, a part of the culture is we want to be nice and we don't want to hurt people's feelings. And what does that lead to, right, Dale? That leads to people not having really important conversations, some of as simple as which are, hey, let's talk about your performance.
But Paul, now do you think that part of that, I don't want to hurt other people's feelings, is as much, I don't want them to be mad at me?
Oh, that's a good point.
Right? So the combination of, I don't want to hurt their feelings, but I don't want them to be mad at me, so I'll just pretend it didn't happen.
Excellent point. Yep. Another reason for avoidance. Really, really good. Gonna have to add that one on, Dale. I like it. In the book, I actually do. I think I talk about it, but that's certainly true. Okay,
No,
so
no, Paul, so Chris
yeah,
Coates, I'll read Chris Coates was saying, was a friend of our, what resonates with me the most is needing to address, to me, you can only solve a problem if you can get
right,
it on the table. The feeling one was the only one that might make me hesitate.
got it. So Chris, you're going to like a slide that's coming up right away. Here we go. Good segue. So what's the impact of avoiding the conversation? Well, the first is nothing actually gets resolved.
Right.
So if we don't have the conversation, how do we actually further a conversation? You can't. And there are probably issues right now in your organization that aren't getting addressed. Certainly, Dale, right? A lot of issues in society that aren't being discussed in a way that's going to actually get anything resolved.
Absolutely.
People avoiding, again, a sense of anger or sadness, resentment. Resentment's a big one. When we go into this study of difficult or critical conversations, confrontations, the amount of resentment that can build up. And sometimes it's resentment towards the other person, of course, but it's also sometimes resentment towards ourselves. We're not actually being willing to have it. Feeling disempowered. One of the things that I say is, at the end of the book, whether if you choose to have the conversation, almost no matter what the outcome, I think you're going to feel empowered.
Yep.
Not choosing that outcome really makes you feel disempowered. Of course, regret over not dealing with it. You see people that go, well, my father and his brother, 40 years, but maybe even in our own lives, times when we were good friends with somebody and something happened and it just never got resolved, right? There was something put in between us and never dealt with. And now we look back 5, 10, 15 years later, and there's just a real sense of regret for what might have been. Feel that pit in your stomach. I love this, but we've probably all had that hiding out in a grocery store aisle at some point, hoping the other person doesn't see us.
Right.
And, it's funny because you get this pit in the stomach thinking about having the conversation. So we avoid having the conversation,
Right.
but then ultimately we get a pit in our stomach anyway. Right. And then the last thing is, and I feel like a wimp. We talked about being disempowered, right? Do you ever say that to yourself? Well, you probably,
Yeah,
but
well, absolutely. That you feel you're chickened out, that you need to kind of just go to the table and just step up. I do a lot of work with teams, and so there are a number of groups and that Lencioni and others that say that when you have true trust, you can have honesty. So when you have trust and you like somebody and you care for somebody, you really should be able to have these difficult conversations.
absolutely. And so people would say that, oh, well, these kind of conversations take courage. And I just don't, I don't think that's true. I think that what they take is one, a strong understanding and desire. This is important, right? This is meaningful. And then the skills to do it.
Yep. Yep.
No. So another thing is want to consider is there is an impact on others. So a lot of times, look, Dale, we're all pretty egocentric as human beings. That's just the way it is. So we tend to think about what's the impact on us, but there's obviously an impact on others. I mean, there's an impact on the other person. You may not even know what's going on for them. In a business environment, there is an impact on our fellow team members. So one case in particular I can think about where there were two, department heads fighting with each other, really arguing. I mean, and it felt like other people around them had to kind of choose sides. Certainly can imagine that in a family situation as well.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, when people in organizations aren't able to or aren't willing to have good, healthy conversations, at the end of the day, it's the customers that suffer.
Yep.
They're just not going to be able to deliver like they should.
Absolutely.
So I think about healthy conversations and what that would look like. And there are only, I think, Dale, a couple of kind of basic elements of what I would call a healthy conversation. One is just an open two-way flow of communication. Right. So I'm not talking about situations where people vent. So I'm angry and upset at you and I just spew. It's not that's not a healthy conversation.
Right.
there's a good case of a woman that I work with, and she actually is in a family business, pretty good sized family business. And she has a colleague who's a yeller, screamer.
Mm,
And they're on the phone, and he starts screaming, and she says, Rudy, I wanted to have a conversation with you. This is not a conversation. So I'm going to hang up now. And when you're ready to have a conversation,
mm.
let me know.
Interesting.
That was beautiful,
Interesting.
right?
Great,
Perfect.
great way to handle it.
And an hour later, he called back, and did he apologize? No. But was he going to apologize? No. And you can't have expectations of people always. But they had a conversation,
Yeah.
which meant there was a two-way flow, right?
Yeah.
All right. Fundamentally, we all just want to feel heard and understood.
Right.
And I see in a lot of conflict and arguments that I'm arguing because I don't think you understand what I'm saying. I don't think you hear what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so that's when paraphrasing just becomes so important. Hey, let me make sure I understand, Sue, what you said.
Yeah. Well, Paul, how do you avoid this? I've got to win this. You're especially with spouses. I've got to win this conversation. So it's not about me getting my point. I got to win. How do you address that?
Well, we are going to talk about a little in just a few slides, but yeah, that
Right.
whole idea, it's a win-lose situation,
Right.
zero-sum kind of game. Boy, that's a terrible mindset to be in. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about, are some mindsets.
Yep.
So being, when you're in a conversation with somebody and they're kind of beating around the bush, they're not really putting it all out there. Well, in a healthy conversation, you are really straightforward, right? You're not putting stuff in your back pocket and leaving it there. Of course, respectful, professional, and remaining calm and composed. So these are the elements for me of what a healthy conversation would look like. And then I asked, what gets in the way? And I know you've done a lot of work on unconscious biases. Most of the folks, I think, joining us today will be familiar with them. So I'm not going to go into detail other than to just generally frame them as mental filters that distort our perception and interpretation of the world around us. And I have an overarching unconscious bias, just sort of creating it, called the mixing pot unconscious bias. So I'm going to ask folks that are listening in to play along here. I want you to imagine that there's a big pot in front of you. And into that, I would like for you to place your age. I would like for you to put in your gender identity. Into it, put your ethnicity, your race, your background. Put into that your education level, family, so your family of origin, then also currently some of you have children, some of you don't have children, you're married, you're not married. So family dynamic issues, your socioeconomic status, financial well-being, maybe where you grew up, where you live now, what job you hold. Just put in all of your life's experiences. Why not just throw your personality in there in all its complex ways? And then I want you to take a nice spoon and just turn it all around, mix it up, and then you will pull out a pair of glasses and you will see that your view and your perspective on the world is as unique as your thumbprint.
Right. That's
And
brilliant.
that's really true. We each have a viewpoint, and it's absolutely, Dale, nobody, when you give a talk, nobody actually hears you in the same way. Right? They all listen maybe,
Right.
but they hear you in a way that meshes with their experiences, their life, what's important to them, what they're dealing with in the moment. And so this idea that we have the right view, that we're right, or it's just, to me, so egocentric or narcissistic or I get you and I could have very different views, but it doesn't mean that mine's more valid or some way or more right than yours.
Right. Exactly right. And then, this is such a powerful, and Paul, I've written books on influence. And so the same thing that we're not born with this, but that mixing pot that you had, that's all put in there. And that colors our perspective. And we need to realize that. And if you realize that, then it's okay to be different. It's okay.
And I know you talk about this, but I would imagine that racism is perpetuated. People are raised in racist households. I mean, You just have to believe that, right?
Yeah, but the people weren't born that way, that they were influenced. So actually, I feel comfortable sitting down at lunch with someone from the KKK and say, how many black people have you met and how many Jewish people have you met? Well, I haven't met any, but I know they're bad. And then you start to realize they weren't born that way. But then the influences, what you're talking about, can really help to shape people to realize, wait, maybe what I thought was about this group was not accurate. And so I think this world needs that kind of healing now. We need to come together economically and socially. And I love what you're saying, but it starts with a conversation.
Right. It's those narrow viewpoints, right, that get us into trouble.
Exactly.
Okay. So everybody, what do you see? I'm going to give you like 10 seconds, and then Dale's going to put a poll up. So what do you see? All right, Dale, go for it.
Okay. Relaunch polling.
I got to learn how to do that, by the way. I appreciate you doing it.
Okay. All right.
Next one.
The next one. Let's do the next. Hold on a sec. Where's our next one? Or is it not doing this? Hold on. There we go. There's the drop down. Polling 2. There we go.
You got it.
Yep, there we go.
So do you see a duck or a rabbit? We'll give folks a minute to click on one of those two. For those of you that said a cow, that's interesting. All right, let's see what they said.
Okay. There's a few more. All right, there we go.
A duck, wow, 87%.
Overwhelmingly.
That is, isn't it? And for those of you that haven't quite seen both of them yet, if you look at that middle eye and you look out to the right, you'll see the rabbit's little nose, and then you look to the left, and there you see the duck snout.
Now, Paul, I'm wondering if because the pictures are often on the right, they may cover the rabbit. So I'm wondering if that impacted it, because that's overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It usually does come out of the duck. That's pretty extreme. Except Easter, I should give a prompt. You know what I mean? Think about Easter before you see this slide. Maybe you get more rabbits. But of course, the point is that here we're just looking at quote unquote something that's black and white. And we only have two options.
Yep.
The world is so complex, so complex, and yet we can't agree on whether it's a duck or a rabbit.
Right.
So,
right, exactly.
So I'm a quoteaholic.
Chris Coates said that's for all the people that are ducking the conversation.
Oh, I love it. Thank you, Chris.
Put a little humor in there.
Beautiful. So quoteaholic, Henry Ford, one of my favorite. If there's any one secret to success, it lies in the ability to get to the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own. And Dale, this is something I know you work at as I do. Especially when people view things differently than we do, just really very intentionally trying to put ourselves in their shoes.
You've got to, and the empathy is the most important skill.
Yep, absolutely. And we'll have that pop up again in a moment. So to be successful when it comes to these kinds of conversations, I think it's so much about the mindset. It just starts with a context of caring. So any difficult conversation, let's say it's with a significant other, and I might say, John, our relationship really matters to me, and something's come up, and I want to talk about it because I don't want it to come between us in any way. Right. You start with an employee and say, Dale, I really, as a boss, my job is to make you successful. And within that, there's sometimes I'm going to offer you feedback that I may not want to hear, but is going to make you better. I feel is going to make you better. And so you come at any of that in a supportive, caring kind of context. It immediately releases people's, lets their shoulders drop a little bit. So your thoughts, right? Your thoughts, your words give you your life. So if I'm going to come into this quote unquote conversation thinking it's going to be a confrontation, well, then it's going to be a confrontation. That's just how it goes. Right. The way that we bring ourselves, the way we carry ourselves, and then the impact that that has on the other person, right? Psychologically, emotionally, behaviorally, as opposed to saying, hey, you know what? This is a really important conversation, and you can acknowledge that pretty passionate, different views of it. But what's important is that we work on this together, right? It's a collaboration. In an organization, at the end of the day, right, it's all about the mission. Why are we here? And are our behaviors contributing to or detracting from completing that mission?
Excellent.
The world is exactly as you say it is. I can say that if it's a difficult conversation, it's going to be a difficult conversation. If I say, for me, it's hard to drive in New York City, it's hard to drive in New York City. But those things are we only give life to them. We only give them reality because we speak them, because we believe them. So be very careful with your thoughts and words. Instead of saying, this is going to be a difficult conversation, you can say, this is going to be an important conversation that maybe it gets emotional, right? But avoid that word difficult.
Yep. That's a
We
great.
talked about right and wrong. It's one of the things is unfortunately as human beings, I think, Dale, that we are so desperate at times to make the other person wrong just so we can be right.
Right.
It's not a question of even listening to the other person. It's like, well, we're not listening, right? We're just sitting there trying to prove them wrong so we can be right. And by the way, when you even say that there's a right answer for something, what does that even mean? Right for who? And by the way, it's only right potentially in this moment. Circumstances could change tomorrow, and what you chose as right today could be wrong tomorrow.
Right. Exactly. And that's what I was saying about the competition. Am I going to win? Okay. Am I right? So I gotta get my point across and force it down your throat. And that's so unhealthy and just so inappropriate, no matter what you do.
All right, we got a couple more. So be curious. I mean, again, when I'm going into a conversation with somebody that I know I'm going to disagree with, and yet we all know, everyone listening knows you got to be a good listener, actively listening. My suggestion is that you just become really curious about what the other person has to say. You can imagine sitting down with somebody in the KKK and, really, I could see you, Dale, really want to help me understand where you're coming from.
Exactly.
Right? How is it that you've reached the kinds of opinions and conclusions that you have?
Exactly.
Right.
And as I said, that the whole influence is you start to, once you understand people are products that are influenced, it can change your perspective to say that, wait, and actually I often say, Paul, people who are different than you are actually more interesting. You want to spend time with people who don't agree with you. That you're missing a great part of life if you spend time with people who think the way you do only.
Absolutely. So assume you don't have all the facts. I'm sure all of us have been in conversations or even kind of attacked, and you want to say, whoa, you don't have all the facts. You don't know the backstory around this. And so I enter conversations saying something like, Sally, here's what I know about the situation. I want to share that with you. You tell me, what am I missing or what have I gotten wrong? So that's the way I like to start these kinds of conversations. Again, making the assumption I don't have all the facts. Another one is I use in my personal life all the time. We are often in these conversations, we get introduced or we meet the word no, like this can't be done, like this is not possible. Right. And of course, that doesn't further the conversation. So what I'll say is, Tony, got it. This is not possible. Now let's talk about what is possible. Right. It becomes a much more interesting conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned empathy before. Yeah. So listen, on the list of skills, traits that make you a successful human being, however you want to, define that, empathy just ranks really, really high. And by the way, I've begun to distinguish the word empathy a little bit. Sympathy is simply feeling sorry, genuine sorry for somebody. But I think there's an empathy 1, empathy 2. So empathy 1 looks like, hey, I want to put myself in your shoes and, understand what you're going through. There's another level. Another level is, hey, I'm going to put myself in your shoes and I'm really going to imagine what it's like to be you. And I had something happen in my personal life like this, where somebody goes, oh, if that happened to me, I'd be really pissed. And I get it. Like, she was putting herself in my shoes, and that's how she would have reacted. She would have been angry and upset.
Right.
And I said, but that's not how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I understand why that happened, and I'm okay with it, right? I'm going to let that. How can you let that go? So it's really interesting. So we've got to be really careful. And empathy, as you know, Dale, is one of those things really hard. You kind of get a real personality trait here,
Yep.
real hard to develop it.
Yep. Yep.
But to the extent that you really understand what it's like to not only be in that other person's shoes, but think like they can think, makes a big difference in these kinds of conversations.
Well, Paul, and one of the things, we haven't talked about this, but we talk about empathy, and I was talking to some people about empathy, but empathy can be arrogant. I empathize with your little problems. And so I said, there's another level, which is kind of your empathy 1 and 2. And I coined a term called interness, that you and I are different, but I care as much about you as I care about myself. And that's a higher level of being. And so, this idea of interness, which is kind of the next step of empathy. But we need to begin to talk about these things. And so this is brilliant, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah. It's a couple more. We're good. Oh, now don't do this when you're at a parking light with your car, a stoplight, because that would get really weird if you sit there and go, oh, gee, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to go or not. I really, Dale, I really push myself. If I'm going to go into a conversation with somebody and we've argued in the past, we just have really different views. I'm coming in, I'm really think that I'm right about this. If you don't agree with me, then you're an idiot. And when I have that kind of a mindset, I just want to very conscious say, you know what, Paul, you might be wrong. You just might be wrong. And if I open myself up to that, boy, it really changes the entire conversation.
But Paul, little Dan, my daughter just walked down here. She said, "Consider you might be wrong." So that resonated with her for her dad.
There you go.
So, but you're so right.
I don't want to say it takes a big person, or it takes a person who's courageous, or probably takes a person with some self-esteem, right, to do that. But I'm always going to listen to, there was a time when, right, the world was flat and Earth was the center of the universe and all that kind of stuff, right? And there's lots of things we're finding out all the time, even with the COVID, right? We were wrong in the beginning around some things we felt really strong about.
But Paul, that's a key point, and this is where again, I keep talking about the influence thing, is that we need to separate. Sometimes we've been influenced to believe that things are right, and because we're hanging with the group that are influencing us, we need to question everything. And that just because everybody's saying this is the way it is, doesn't mean that we have to go that way. And I think that's been part of the problem, that people are drudging along and they start to agree with one side or the other and realize both sides are wrong.
Yeah.
And both sides have it wrong. And so I don't identify with either side, because both have it wrong. I can support this side over here in this way, and I can support that side. And we need more of that.
Yeah. And look, we know that there's an awful lot of gray in the world.
Yeah.
And we can say right and wrong, that there's an awful lot of gray. And again, what's right for you in the moment, what's right for America in the moment, and what's right for, your business in the moment, all that's relative and a moment in time. And if I make a decision for me or my family, is that going to have an adverse consequence on somebody else?
Right.
And that's something I don't think we ask ourselves enough about. So last one. If you can find that poll number 3, just wanted to ask people, which of the mindset do you think would help you the most in these difficult conversations?
Okay. So which mindset will help you most? Can you see it, Paul? You see it?
I can. Yep. People should be on it.
There you go.
I think they get to choose one. And I know we're all, everyone on this call, we're all figuring out this Zoom stuff, but I'm sure like many of us, I can't wait to get in person again. And having some of these conversations, there's nothing like being in person to have them, right, Dale?
To have these challenging conversations. You're absolutely right.
All right, let's see what folks had to say.
Okay, hold on. Okay.
The empathy and the mindset.
Yep.
Oh, nobody liked our right versus wrong thinking. Well, they only had one to choose from, so hopefully it's not as though they saw no value in it, but the other ones that they saw more value in.
But it's spread out. It's spread out.
Yeah. All right. So to finish up, and this whole topic of difficult conversations, I mean, I think what's most important is when we find ourselves avoiding it, skirting it, as the gentleman said, ducking it. When we find ourselves with that kind of a mindset, we just got to go to the place of say, let's talk about it. And that if we were just able to say, let's talk about it, let's have a conversation, let's approach it with the kind of mindset issues that we've talked about today. You know, somebody said, you know, confrontation takes two people. All right, it takes two people. So one of the ways that if I'm with somebody now, I think if I don't resist, right? If I'm not fighting them, if I'm not arguing back, there's no confrontation.
Right.
So, and I know we've got, we started with a soccer ball. Again, I hope that you've thought about, as we've gone through this brief time together, some ways in which you might put some of this work on the playing field for you in your business. And then of course, also personally. And Dale, we've got some time for some questions. And if they don't, I know we'll have some time for some conversation.
So we have some questions here, but again, Paul, I want to introduce you to Tony Russo, who's a big friend of the Rothman Institute. And do you want to stop sharing, Paul? Or
yeah, I can do that. Thank you very much. And so, Tony, nice to meet you over the.
Same here. Same here.
So Tony works with thousands of businesses. So Tony, this idea of let's talk about it. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, great presentation, Paul. And I couldn't help but, and Dale knows this, I deal in government affairs, really at the Trenton level. But as you were going through your presentation, I'm putting it into context of what's going on in Washington, and I've never seen it as bad as it's gotten, to the point where it's almost they're having you choose a side. You know, let's not compromise. You know, it's unbelievable how it's gotten to that point. And I can't help but say that, you know, we got to come back to the middle. And you went over a few things. I think empathy to me resonated a lot, because one of our members told me that a good manager, he liked his manager. And I said, well, why do you like your manager? He says, Tony, I've had about 20 managers in my life, and this is the first one that actually empathized with me. It really tried to understand where I'm coming from, what my issues are. And to him, that mattered more than salary and mattered more than, you know, benefits and everything. So I that kind of struck me as, you know, wow, he's had 20 managers in his life.
Wow.
And he picked the one that had the empathy.
You know, I thank you for sharing that. Dale touched upon my first book, Carrots and Sticks Don't Work. It's about respect in the workplace, and respect's an acronym, and the C in that's consideration. So fundamentally, just treating people with thoughtfulness and kindness, you know, and empathy. By the way, I just want to read something really quickly. This is out of the new book. I'm just going to really quickly, because you touched on it. So there are different unconscious biases. One's reactive devaluation, which asserts that we devalue proposals made by those we consider our adversaries. There is no better example of this bias than how politicians often refuse to even entertain proposals initiated by those in opposing parties. Allow me a soapbox moment. Don't you find it interesting, read maddening, that in every election cycle, those running for public office talk about the American people's frustration at the lack of collaboration in Washington, and yet it never improves? That is why a copy of this book is being sent to every member of the United States Senate. It would be wonderful if, instead of all the rhetoric and finger pointing, politicians simply said one another, let's talk about it, and had civil dialogue. So a copy is being sent to every U.S. Senator.
Wonderful.
So, but the question I have for you, Paul, is let's talk about it, right? And it struck me too that you could keep talking to somebody, but at some point, you know, you might have to make a decision that maybe it's just not getting through. And that's the tough part, is when does that reach that crisis point where you say, you know, you can't talk anymore. You got to maybe make a decision that's not going to be pleasant, and that's not always easy.
But, you know, in the healthy conversation slide, part of a healthy conversation doesn't mean you get your way. It just means you have a healthy conversation about things. And at the end of the day, there are decisions that need to get made. I think where there's a disagreement, and of course, if it's the business owner, but I think what we all want is make sure our points are heard. Make sure you understand where I'm coming from. And if that, at least that's accomplished, I think it goes on. And then why, right? Then they understand why is that decision being made. So we can disagree, but there are certainly strategies in here that make it a lot more palatable and easier to move on.
And the other piece is coaching. I know what Tony, I do a lot of coaching, and Paul does as well. You know, kind of asking the question. So you feel that way. Well, tell me, what's your perspective? Why do you feel that way? And I think part of the problem with politicians is they don't, because I mean, you even look at this Congress. So, you know, one side is against things that they did when they were in power. I mean, it just makes the exact same thing. It makes no sense on both sides. And so, you know, and I'll say, I'm going to make a controversial statement. I will say that there are some Republican presidents that did amazing things, and there's some Democratic presidents that have done amazing things. Just by even saying that is controversial. And so we need to move beyond that and really have this conversation. But Tony, your wisdom is you're here. Anything anything burning with the legislative world that we should know about relating to?
Well, I mean, it's timely with this topic, but right now it's all about budget season in Trenton, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot going on, and New Jersey's flush with money, and you know, we have this money coming in from DC with the American Rescue Plan. You know, and I keep going back to what Paul was saying, is that, you know, our ask of the legislature and the governor is, you know, have those conversations, talk to the impacted stakeholders and get their feedback. And hopefully we'll see that in the coming weeks and months, but that's yet to be seen. So, but there's a lot going on there, Dale, from, it's all about the money right now in Trenton, and they have to make a decision by June 30th. Which seems like a long time, but it's really not.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the question. So Stephen Oriel says, living here in DC for the last 25 years, it's never been worse. Mm. So, you know, and now Jackie Larea, you know, our friend, how do you get people to own up to their actual and real responses and reactions versus waffling? Paul, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, boy, I'm going to sound like a politician trying to dodge that one. It would be really helpful to have a concrete example.
Right.
I mean, I guess what and you said, I ask a lot of questions to get people to where I want them to be, because I don't feel you can't shove things down people's throats, right? They just become really defensive. So if somebody's waffling, it means that they feel threatened in general.
Right.
So how are you going to create a kind of environment where it's okay for them to be vulnerable? So when I always think waffling, I think fear in some way.
Now Lisa Chowansky has a great question. If you have a whole team that is seeing performance issues, do you recommend a group approach or just one-on-one? If you're the leader of the team, what do you recommend? And obviously it depends sometimes, but
you're seeing performance problems within the whole team or on individuals?
Within the whole team. And so you want to change the team. How do you know, what advice?
You know, boy, when I see that, I think a couple of things. You know, one, I think, you know, about the manager, right? And who are they kind of leading that team? And is the team really connected to the purpose of their department or to the mission of the organization? Are there, like, the number one reason that expectations aren't met, people are not clear about what they are in the first place. Right. So is the purpose of our team, do we understand why it matters relative to the mission of the organization? Are the roles and responsibilities clearly defined? Are people being held accountable? And boy, one of the things that happens, but I didn't touch on, is, you know, managers will avoid holding people accountable, having those difficult conversations for various reasons. And guess what happens? Not only does that problematic behavior continue, the manager actually loses respect.
Right. Now Mark Aorio, who was on this show, has a good comment. Isn't it a matter of coming to an agreement with the purpose of your team, whether you are a team of two or a team of thousands? With purpose, it is much easier to put aside personal differences, and that's really what he does with BCAT. This assessment is purpose. Thoughts on that,
100%.
Paul?
Yeah, listen, and especially I think more than ever, you know, my grandfather came and worked in a rock quarry, you know, for 16 hours a day in the 1930s. You know, it wasn't so much about purpose, it was about putting food on the table. Well, thankfully, for many of us that are blessed enough to be in the kind of jobs that we are, purpose matters now. And especially in the younger generation, and that's a wonderful thing. So if we can put our differences aside for the overarching, the mission or the purpose of the organization, that's something I always pull to. When I give presentations, the first slide's the soccer ball, the second one is why are we here, the third one's the mission of the organization. This is why we're here.
Right. So Lisa clarified. So actually, the issues are with one individual on the team, but the whole team is seeing it. So what are your thoughts given that further description?
Yeah, everybody. It really needs to be the manager's got to own that one-on-one, and at the same time, it's got to be clear to the other team members that the manager is addressing the situation. On a really high functioning team, and I think sports teams, their fellow team members will be holding one another accountable. Doesn't even require the manager to do that. You really want to be careful of, depends on the culture of the organization. And as much as you might want to kind of have the whole team pile on. Other approach I'm thinking about too, which I really like to use, is to encourage that individual to understand their impact on the rest of the team. So here's a very simple one. You got somebody who's coming in 10 minutes late. To them, they're just coming in 10 minutes late. But what they don't understand, that means that the rest of the team is being impacted in some way. Right. So I would encourage those conversations to take place between that individual and his or her team members.
Right. There's another. Actually, I'm loving there. A lot of questions. This is really resonating with folks. So one question: the big companies have huge HR departments where these difficult conversations are often sent. Should small and family-owned companies have some kind of HR position to be a mediator, or what do you advise for the companies that don't have HR to have these conversations?
Oh, I'm so glad somebody asked that question. So here's my feeling, is that because most supervisors, first-line supervisors or managers, are really poor at having these conversations, which, let's just take it's a performance issue, for example, they don't deal with it, right? They don't deal with it, and then it becomes a problem. And then it ends up in the HR department's office. Once it is in HR's office, in some ways it's almost too late. Then you're at a point where people are getting written up or put on a performance improvement. I think it doesn't matter what the size of the organization is, Dale. At every level, people need to know how to have effective conversations.
And it's more important now than ever. And so Tony, Tony at CINJ, they put on amazing seminars. They basically have, but as people are starting to get back into the workplace, there's going to be more conflict. There's going to be more stress. There's going to be more, avoiding conversations that 3 months from now are going to burn up. So I don't know how, and Tony is a real entrepreneur and the entrepreneurial thinking. And so, maybe we have a panel with some people talking about, how do you have difficult conversations in the new post-pandemic work environment?
Dale, you hit it right on the head. I have a call next week with a couple of our members that specialize in that stresses at work and how you're going to deal with it. Because now with the vaccines, right? And we're going to have a program about vaccines next week. But what happens when your coworkers didn't get the vaccine? Are you going to come back? Are you going to have an issue? It doesn't make sense to talk about people's getting vaccines. It's just like the stress levels are going to be there because people have been working remotely if you were in one of those jobs that you could, and now you're starting to come back to the office. It gets back to that routine. It gets back to that, that anxiety and that stress. And I think employers are going to be faced with that, and they have been faced with it. And some of them need advice and counsel on how to deal with it. It's not going to be easy.
Well, go ahead, Paul.
No, it's going to be incredibly challenging. I mean, and the F word's going to come up a lot, which is fair. Like, what's fair for people? And what if you're in a larger organization and my manager is one of those guys who wants butts in the chair, but this other manager says, hey, I'm really okay with flexible scheduling and all that. Well, you think I'm going to want to stay on this team? I mean, organizations are going to really be confronted. If they want to go back to the old way of doing things, they're going to be confronted probably with losing some really good talent.
No, you know what, Paul, and it's interesting because I'll bring it back to the context of politics, but the word compromise can also be applied to private businesses too, where as long as the job gets done, try to compromise. And again, just to bring up conversations I've had with members, if you were an employer where you were rigid and you had 9 to 5 and you got to be at work, those days are gone. I think you have to look at it through a new lens, right? So that glasses image that you had with that mix and pot, you have to look at the world differently now. And you have to just say to yourself, how is the job going to get done? And you got to be willing to compromise.
And then you have to have a manager who's not paranoid or is not effective. Well, how do I know my person's really doing their job?
Right.
That's a problem. If you're not a manager who can figure that out, that's clear. But I hear that. Well, I think they can't work. How do I know what they're doing? I know a company, so I swear this is true, that they went back to work almost immediately. And you ready for this? If you want to work from home, you have to take a half a PTO day, because their logic is you're running around with your kids and you're doing this and you're playing games. So you're not really working as hard as you would be. That's quite a mindset.
Well, we actually have some of our family business forum members who actually have been employee sensitive, had people work from home, and their productivity increased. So that so they're going to see more and more stories of those kinds of things where they're saying they're doing, and half the time they're doing more work. And so why are we paying on this hourly rate? Let's pay people on productivity. Yeah. And so there's a whole mindset. And I have to, you talked about the vaccines. I have to, before we leave, confess that I had my second Moderna, and so I said I might have passed out today, but I knew Paul and Tony would carry the ball. If I was lying here out, I'm
glad you're okay. I'm glad you're okay.
So far, but I heard 24 hours after, that's when it hits me. So I got a few hours before, or actually 1 hour before I.
And well, we're glad you're well, and we're glad you're going to stay well. By the way, just one comment. John said someone threw up there about manufacturing environment, production lines. Of course, all of that, absolutely. But I was going to say was, going into all this, if I owned a company, man, when it comes to asking people whether or not they got the vaccine, I just have to say that question is not allowed on at all. It doesn't matter. Dale, you and I could be good friends. Hey, Dale, did you get it? That's just not a question you can ask.
Right. Right.
No, so Paul, we're actually, it's funny you should say that, because next Thursday, we have a lot of people signed up for it, but we have a couple of attorneys on the panel, big HR departments, because these are questions that are going to come up. Just be prepared, right? What you can and can't say, and what is getting back to, at the end of the day, you want your people have always said this to me, their number one resource are their people, staff, because or else they don't have a business, and they want them to be healthy. And how was it that they were healthy, and how can they be productive? But I understand what the comment is with the manufacturers. You can't have somebody work remotely. You need to have somebody be there. And we represent a lot of manufacturers, and I got to give people credit, because when times are tough, that's when innovation comes out, right? That's when people think outside the box, and they come up with solutions that even surprise me. But it works, and at the end of the day, you'll find that way. And remarkably, it works, and that's at the end of the day, that's what counts.
That's what. Before we go, Paul, how do people get in touch with you? There are a lot of questions here. So, what's your email address? And
my website's paulmarciano.com. You can get me at paul@paulmarciano.com. And Dale, thank you so much for having me on as your guest, and for all of the work that you and the Rothman Institute do. It's wonderful.
I'm typing it. So Paul Marciano.
Yep, that works.
Okay.
And by the way, I'm all about respect in the workplace, and it has never been needed more than right now. And anybody wants to talk to me about respect and how we put it on the playing field of work, I really would love to have that conversation.
And we want to connect you with some of, I said, Mark Iorio. They have this BCAT system, so you guys should connect. And I'm a big believer in let's connect entrepreneurs together. And Tony does that much better than I. And so, Tony, any big programs coming up before we go?
The vaccine one next week, and we're actually trying our first in-person event next Friday.
Nice.
People are ready to come back.
Well,
safely, but it's coming up.
I went this weekend. I went to a wedding in New Orleans. So I was down in New Orleans. I had my mask on. It was the first time they were pretty much back to normal. So it really was actually nice. And so, so it's time. The world is coming back. So I hope everybody can get their vaccine. And let's move on. But thank you all for watching. Paul, great job. Tony, it's good to be back. And we will see you at our next session. Take care, Susan. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.